4. I dug the oars into blue water, drove the boat toward her so hard that its prow bit sand. I jumped out, my arms outstretched. But she backed away, fear in her eyes. It was clear that if I'd taken another step, she would have turned and fled. "Helvetia," I said reproachfully, "why are you acting like this? After all, you did come to meet me, and only because I gave you my word," she said. "I am a Roman, remember. We keep our word. Once we give it, no matter what it costs." Her voice hadn't the faintest trace of warmth in it. I could feel myself getting angry. In my mouth, I was anything but a patient soul. "Fat lot this is going to cost you," I said. The heavy freight of sarcasm with which my tone was laden got over to her. She bent her bright head, looked up again. "My father will probably beat me to death," she said. I said, "No," drawing the word out, giving it the shape of astonishment. "My sister Tertia went to the games once, without his permission," Helvetia said, in her grave, sweet voice. "There was a young patrician she was in love with. He was a good-for-nothing who'd run through his father's money, so he had to hire himself out as a gladiator. When my father found it out, he hung Tertia by her wrist from the transom of the women's quarters. By the time he'd done with her, not an uncia, an inch of her back remained that wasn't in ribbons." Nathan. "I went to bed and put a pillow over my head so I wouldn't hear her screaming. It did no good. I could still hear her. She was abed, lying on her stomach, of course, 3 months. And she is much bigger and stronger than I am. All my sisters are. She wasn't lying. I could tell that. I felt sick. This wasn't going the way I'd planned it at all. I didn't say anything. To what this lovely child had just told me, what was there really to be said? She looked down at the sands, faced me again, whispered, "My skin is very delicate, very thin. I only hope my father can contain his wrath. It will grieve him terribly if he kills me. He loves me very much, Nathan." I stood there. Speech wouldn't come. I must have looked like a beached fish, opening its mouth and gulping air. "And yet, knowing that, you came," I said. "Yes, Nathan." "But why, Helvetia? In God's name, why?" She turned away from me so that I saw her face in profile for the first time. A cameo cut by the hand of God. "Don't ask me that," she said. I stared at her. "All right," I said. "I'll ask you something else. How will your father know? I'll bring you home long before he comes off duty," and she looked at me. "Because I'll tell him," she said quietly. "Everything, except your name, except who you are. When he asks me that, I'll simply refuse to say anything. And that will get him so wild that he probably will kill me. You see, I've never lied to him, Nathan. I don't even know how to lie. And I don't want to learn." "Don't be a fool, Helvetia," I said. "It's simpler to twist the truth a little than to—" She shook her head, smiled a wan little smile. "It isn't simpler, Nathan. You have to prop a lie up with another lie, and that one will still another, until nothing remains simple or clear, until life is all lies." She looked at me with those fishery eyes of her. "You think I'm a fool, don't you?" she said. "You're probably right. If I weren't a fool, I shouldn't be here." I have never been slow of wit, My uncle Hezron often said I was too clever for my own good. Borders on cunning, Nathan, which is an unclean thing, he told me once. As usual, he was right. Am I among the people you can't lie to? I asked her. I can't lie to anybody, Helvetia said softly. Then I want to know, will you tell your father why you came to meet me? Her blue eyes caught the light in a startled leap. Then she bowed her head again. Yes, she said, so low I felt rather than heard that sound. And that why is? I said. Because I gave you my word. All right, that, and no other reason. She turned away. The sun was up now, outlining her profile in a wash of light. She was silent, intensely silent. No other reason, Helvetia? I said. Nathan, would you strip me naked in a public place? I thought, with great pleasure. I said, I don't understand you, Helvetia. That's what you're doing now. A certain reticence, a little modesty, are like clothing, Nathan, and you would take them away from me. You're very hard. You really don't have much mercy in you, do you? About this, not an iota or a jot. I don't play children's games. Tell me, Helvetia, why did you come? Her head came up. She faced me squarely. I saw the white rush wall her eyes out. The falling flash hang vibrant upon the defenseless quiver of her mouth. Because I love you, Nathan, she said. She lay in my arms in that little grove just north of Migdal Nunaya. I had been kissing her for the better part of an hour, so it shouldn't be difficult to imagine the state I was in by then. But she remained just as cool, just as serene. Helvetia, I said. Yes, Nathan? Not like that. Don't clamp your teeth together. Open your mouth a little. I heard the ragged beat get into her breathing then. Now, I exulted. Now, I put my hand upon her secret body. Beneath her stola, her eyes opened, flared, she caught my wrist hard. Helvetia, I groaned. No, she whispered then. Please don't, Nathan. You don't love me? I snarled. She stared at me. I do love you, she said. So much, so very much. Prove it, I said. By letting you do that, she said. Yes. She went on looking at me. Her eyes misted over. All right, she said. But the way she said it was wrong. All wrong. You mean it? I said. I always mean what I say, Nathan. Only what? When I go home tonight, I shall open my veins. She had a flat, almost expressionless way of saying the thing she really meant. I didn't doubt her. I couldn't. It took me at least 3 tries to get that "Why, Helvetia" out. I swore before Isis that I'd come virgin to my nuptial bed. I promised her that if I broke that vow, I'd take my life. For you, I'll break my vow. But I'll also pay forfeit. Helvetia, you're mad. She put her fingers and traced the outline of my mouth with her tips. I suppose I am, she said. There's a devil in me. There is. There is. I rolled away from her, stood up, took my dagger from its sheath. She came to her knees, watching me. I put the point to the great vein in the crook of my arm, pushed it in. The blood spurted. I stood there, watching it, flooding out of me with a curious kind of detachment. She stretched out her own milk-white arm. Now me, Nathan, she said. No, I howled. You'd leave me, she said. Give me the dagger, Nathan. I I know how. My father showed me. We've been stationed in many bad places where there was danger of a ravishment. So give it to me. This way nobody can separate us, not even my father. This way we'll be together always. I hung there, staring at her. I I don't want you dead, Helvetia, I whispered. Nor I you. Give me your arm, Nathan. I averted my coward's eye, put my bloody arm out to her. She tore off a strip of her stola and bound it up. Then we were kneeling there, facing each other and crying. Both of us, two children pressing hot, wet, salt-trembling mouth to mouth, bewildered by their blood. It was then that the madwoman, Miriam of Magdala, started in to howl. I can't describe that sound. It was absolutely fiendish. It rose in ululent pulsations that were beast-like, demented, wild. Helvetia clung to me, trembling all over. And I knew then I could never leave her. That she had to be mine, forever. What on earth is that? She said. Miriam of Nunyaya. The Galileans say she possesses of 7 devils. Look, here she comes now. Miriam came out from among the trees. She was dressed in rags, pieces of tent cloth, sacking, a flurry of ribbons. She'd stolen God knows where. I could see the straw and twigs tangled in her black hair, the dirt on her face, the lines of it ground into her neck. Even so, she was not uncomely. But even from where she passed 5 rods away, we could smell her. She stank most fearsomely. She probably hadn't had a bath since she lost her wits 5 years before. She disappeared again into another clump of trees. She was still howling. Poor thing, Helvetia whispered. Poor lost mad thing. Miriam's retreating howls beat against my eardrums. Not only you, Magdalene, but I, and all the world, I thought. Then I remembered. I had money. I'd won 40,000 sesterces in wagers on the long race. A fortune. With that, I could take Helvetia, fly to the ends of the earth, live. Will you marry me, Helvetia? I said. The mad woman went on howling. What? What did you say? Helvetia said. I said, will you marry me? I shouted. She stared at me. Miriam's voice sank into a low, tortured moaning. But Nathan, we can't. My father. Will you never find us? Will never find us where I'll take you. You'll keep your vow to Isis. I won't touch you till we're wed. By whatever rites you want. Before Isis. Before Baal. Before... Miriam's voice rose up, slivering the sky. Will you? I bellowed, louder than Miriam could. And madder, surely. Helvetia stared at me, a long, slow breath, halted time. I didn't even hear the madwoman's screams. The intensity of Helvy's silence drowned them. Then, mutely, my darling nodded. Oh, bless you, Helvetia, I said. I spent the whole day collecting my bets. I didn't take Helvy with me, of course. I left her at my lodgings until that necessary task was done. By that time, it was so late that night caught us before we got any farther than Capharnaum. So we stayed at the inn there. I told the innkeeper we were man and wife. He winked his eye and charged me double the usual price. I lay on the floor beside the bed night long and listened to Helvetia crying. It was almost dawn before she slept. In the morning I hired horses and rode away from there with my prize. Helvetia's eyes were swollen shut from weeping. I was getting a little sick of it by then. Normally, I should have ridden straight across Galilee and entered Phoenicia somewhere between Sepphoris and Jotapata. But I didn't dare. Both those cities were too close to Caesarea, where the Romans had their seat, and surely, by now, the centurion Helvetius was out, fully armed with 2 decurii at the very least, if not a whole century at his back, searching for his daughter. So I struck due north from Capharnaum to Gachala, crossed into Phoenicia, some 10 milia northwest of there, kept on going until we got to Tyre. Evil has its uses. In Tyre, wickedest city under heaven since Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed, all things could be bought, even a no-questions-asked passage for 2 obvious runaways, lacking even baggage on a swift coastal vessel bound for Alexandria. We put in at Ptolemais, at Dora, 1,000 sesterces, convinced our captain that Caesarea, where 100 dockside idlers would have recognized Helvetia at once, was no worthy port of call. We bypassed it, and were free. Some days of sea and sun put the roses back into Helvetia's cheeks. She became playful, gay, climbed into my arms, kissed me endlessly, until I snarled at her. You want to force me to ravish you, Helvetia? Or go mad? Which? She stared at me then, and the first startled recognition of what love was, that male and female created, he, them, came into her eyes. Later, Nathan, her voice made flute music, with cymbals underneath, velvety and warm. After the rites, I promise. What? I groaned. That I won't fight too hard, my Helvetia said. There are many Jews in Alexandria. When I explained my need to the Grand Rabbi, he graciously offered me his own house for the ceremony. Moreover, he repeated each part of it over again in Greek for Helvetia's benefit. I need not mention that traveling as she did with her father from one end of the empire to the other, she'd been forced to learn the universal language, for once you were east of Italia itself, Latin served for nothing. I had never heard the Caducean, the sanctifications, said in Greek before. They were solemn and impressive, in that language too. I stood under the chuppah, the canopy, waiting. I had my head covered, as the law requires. A Jewish couple of the highest Sadducean rank, acting in loco parentis for my Helvetia, brought her to me under the chuppah. And so moved was that dear, sweet matron who acted as my darling's mother for an hour, that she cried, "Bless her!" I took the ring from the velvet cushion the rabbi's youngest son held up. I slipped it on the forefinger of Helvetia's right hand. I said the kiddush, the vow. Behold, thou art sanctified unto me by this ring, according to the law of Moses and Israel. Helvetia's mouth made a pale pink blur, so wildly did it quiver. She was sobbing aloud, as though her poor little heart were truly broken. "Helvetia," I said. "Oh, Nathan," she wailed, "it is so beautiful." I read the Ketubah, the marriage settlement. "Upon thee all my worldly goods I do bestow. I will work for thee. I will honor thee. I will support and maintain thee as it beseemeth a Jewish husband to do. Helvetia bowed her head. Her shoulders shook. The good couple stared at her in astonishment. So did I. I had never seen a Roman wedding, so I couldn't understand why our Jewish ceremony moved her so. Years later, in Rome, I did see a pair of patricians, friends of a young Roman matron, with whom I was having an adulterous love affair, as usual, wed and understood my Helvy's emotion finally. Like everything Roman, their rites emphasized the physical over the spiritual, and were, to put it mildly, utterly obscene. We recited the 7 benedictions of the newlywed together, or we tried to. Helvetia was crying too hard to do more than make an incomprehensible babble of the words the rabbi said in Greek. We drank the ceremonial wine. I smashed the glass. My voice rang out, vibrant, soaring. Okay, see, this is where it gets ridiculous. Sorry, I just got to say something here. Okay, according to the laws of Moses, he's getting married to a Roman by a rabbi? Not likely. And secondly, here's where information is valuable and things become ridiculous and sorry. Anyway, this thing, we drank the ceremonial wine and I smashed the glass. Right? The Jewish custom, smash the glass. Mazel tov, right? Where they stomp on it, right? Well, that smashing of the glass was meant to commemorate the destruction of the temple, which hadn't happened yet at this point in history, right? It had the first temple, yes, but the second, the custom was based on that. What's going on? Anyway, doesn't matter. Let's continue. Sorry about the interruption. Just had to. What's going on over here? Anyway, if I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning. If I do not remember thee, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. If I prefer not Jerusalem above my chief joy. Then I bent and kissed my bride. Nathan, she whispered, you were right. Your ways are better than ours. I feel so good. The way I belong to you is holy, so pure. Now I'm yours truly, and for always, she said. What? As if. Okay. In Alexandria, we were happy. It was as though we alone of all humankind had discovered, or even invented love. The only dispute, for you couldn't call so slight a thing a quarrel, we had in all that time, was religious. Helvetia wanted to make a little shrine to Isis. The Mater Dolorosa in her home. And when I explained to her why this could not be, quoted to her the Holy Scriptures. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, nor any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the waters under the earth. And went on with the rest of it, compelled by its sonority, its majesty, saying that part about God's jealousy, his laying the fathers' sins even to their great-great-grandchildren's charge. Helvetia said a thing that shocked me, but which it has seemed to me ever since is true. This is absurd. Like, who is this guy? Is he devoted or not? Like, this is obviously written by someone who doesn't know. Anyway, I don't think I like your God very much, Nathan. He's this old... Okay. Just read it. Even a man who punishes a child for what his father has done would be a monster, I think. And you say grandchildren and great-grandchildren. So I quoted her the next verse, the 6th. and shewing mercy unto thousands of them who love me and keep my commandments. She opened her eyes very wide at that and stared at me. So he loves those who love him. Hardly generous of him, is it? Helvetia, I said, I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting. She whispered, I understand that. I know what jealousy is like. The other day, when you admired that Egyptian girl so fervently, I wanted to die. But I loved you before you loved me. At the exact instant, I saw you standing there like one of the earth's gods before the beginning of that race. And I'll go on loving you long after you've ceased to remember my name. But I can't think of anything you could do that would make me want to punish you. People and gods who want to punish, who even think of anything but to love, to forgive, are cruel, like my father. I grinned at her, bent and kissed her cheek. Sleep well, Helvetia, I mocked. I'll see you tomorrow. No, the day after. Nathan, she wailed, where are you going? To visit the Egyptian, of course. Didn't you say that you couldn't think of anything I could do that you couldn't forgive me for? She stood there looking at me, and her little heart-shaped face was a picture of utter woe. Like many good and gentle people, she was sadly wanting in a sense of humor. She bent her pale, bright head, looked up again. The tears upon her face were a rush, a flood. Enjoy yourself, Nathan, she said. That was all. But I clawed her into my arms, shaken with pure terror at the way her voice sounded, saying that she clung to me, trembling all over. Helvy angel, I groaned. If you ever see me come into this house with one hand gone and the blood spurting from the mangled stump, you'll know I've touched another woman. Because before Adonai Elohim and all the seraphim, I swear I'd cut it off. Then she proved that she did not have a sense of humor after all, a very Roman sense of humor. She gave me a squeeze, giggled girlishly, said, Then I hope you never go further than touching, Nathan. I do so want a child, you know. It took some moments for her meaning to penetrate my mind. Then I threw back my head and roared. I found employment in the chief rabbi's house as a copyist of scrolls, at which art, false modesty, be damned. I was very good indeed, because even then I realized that husband it as we would, our money wasn't going to last forever. Because even then I realized that husband it as we would, our money wasn't going to last forever, and always during those summer months, while the sun still stood high in the heavens, long after my tasks were done, I'd find Helvetia waiting for me just outside the great man's door. We wandered hand in hand like children through the lovely city. In the parks, Helvetia fed the tame gazelles, the apes, the peacocks. She loved animals too. She loved all living things. She was feeding a gazelle out of her own slim white hand on that all but fatal evening, when I heard the clank of Roman armor. I went to the edge of the road under the palm trees to watch the cohorts pass by. I hadn't then learned to hate everything Roman. Helvetia ran to me at once, took my arm. Don't stand there where they can see you, Nathan, she said. She was the child of a legionary. She understood what I did not, that among the Roman officers, transferred with great frequency from one far distant outpost to another, the chances were exceedingly good that the commander of this cohort could well be an old comrade in arms of her father's. More, she guessed another thing correctly. It turned out that the centurion, Helvetius, sacrificing his pride to his rage, his grief, had had her description and mine sent by coasting galleys to every Roman garrison within 1,000 milia pasuum of Jerusalem. She was too late. The stern-faced old Dux general, who from horseback led the armored foot soldiers, pulled up his nag so hard that had the heat-dulled rack of bones had the strength, it would have reared. "Seize them!" he roared. "That tow-head wench! That black-skinned little bastard there!" That's all he had time for, because I'd grabbed Helvetia by the arm, and we were off, running through the park as though Satan himself were at our heels. As be it said, Satan was, but this time, at least, he was overmatched. The legionaries were mostly Germans, newly transferred from that miserably cold and wet clime. They were burdened with armor. They didn't know the city. Before we were out of the park, we'd already lost them. A long series of zigzags through crooked streets made our escape, for the moment, an established fact. But afterward, it was that I knew I had to consider now. Helvetia leaned against a wall, panting, tears of pure terror glittering in her eye. "Oh, Nathan," she cried. "Don't worry about it," I said. "I'll take you to the rabbi's house, and then—" "You'll stay with me?" she moaned. "Don't leave me, Nathan. Don't leave me, please." "Only long enough to get the money from our place, love," I said. "Though on second thought we'd better go there now, before they've had time to find out where we live. Then tonight we'll take ship to Athens, say." Helvetia shook her head. "Not Athens, Nathan," she said. "Rome." "Rome?" I said. "Yes, listen to me, dearest. I've lived all over. As a centurion's daughter, I've had to. There isn't a city in the empire that strangers can come to without their presence being noted within the first week. At the very best, within the first 2 weeks, say, except Rome herself. The capital swallows 1,000 newcomers a day. Besides, nobody'd dream we'd dare go there, since all the world knows the Imperator expelled your people from Rome some time ago. And the first time the guards at the very quay catch sight of this beak of mine," I began, "they'll—" "Many races have hooked noses," Helvetia said sweetly. "And since you're clean-shaven, they'll think you're a Syrian or an Arab. For that matter, my pale hair is as much trouble as your nose. Where else, except in Gaul or Britain or Germany, all too far away and all miserably cold and savage country, wouldn't my blonde hair be noticed? Rome is full of northern bastards. We could lose ourselves there as we could no place else on earth. Besides, it's the last city on earth my father would even dream that we—" I grinned at her then. "Done," I said. "Rome it is." How was I to know that in the stew of iniquity there were dangers compared with which the centurion Helvetius' wrath was as nothing? 4 months from that day, we anchored offshore before Ostia, one of the 3 ports that served imperial Rome. I stood there with my arm about Helvetia, watching the urinators, divers, plunging for coins. The passengers threw them. I tossed a few myself until my angel stopped me. "Don't be wasteful, dearest," she whispered. "Life is very dear in Rome." It was. Within a month, I was already alarmed at the way our little pile of coins was diminishing. So I went out and looked for work. That night, the next, 600 nights all told, I came home and faced her. "Any luck, my dearest?" Helvetia said. "No," I said angrily, warily, despairingly. "Look, Helvetia, I have no skills beyond those of a secretary copyist. And here people don't hire scribes. They buy them." "I know, darling," Helvetia said. "And cheaply," I roared. A good teamster costs more. Rome is swarming with clever Greeks, slaves, one and all, most of whom have forgot more than I ever knew. Oh, Helvy, she came to me and kissed me. Don't worry about it, darling, she said cheerfully. It will turn out all right. It didn't, but she was brave to point out gallantry. Only one thing could and did make her weep. The fact that month after month, with cruel regularity, nature brought down upon her the irrefutable evidence that she was not with child. Still, we had each other, so we were happy, and Rome is not the worst place on earth to be poor. The games were free, and under Tiberius Caesar, not too offensive. The Imperator was too stingy to stage elaborate ones. I loved the chariot races. At times, Helvetia would even allow me to bet a sesterce on my favorites, the greens. Fortunately for us, I always lost. I say fortunately, because had I won, the gambling fever would have seized me, surely, and one run of bad luck would have finished our little hoard. One morning, quite by accident, we stumbled upon a gladiatorial contest, for God witness it, we'd have never gone had we known what was being staged that day. At first, I was fascinated by the skill the fighters displayed. I noted most of all the grace and beauty of the retiari, the net and trident men. I found myself consciously favoring them, those slight, beautiful, naked youths whose speed alone stood between them and death. Then a gladiator's backhand stroke laid open a retiarius thigh to the bone. I saw the flesh gape like a crimson mouth, the yellowish femur showing through before the blood flowing out, and the poor dying bastard screamed. The tears stung my eyes, blinded me. I bent my head and wept. At once the women nearest us began to hoot with savage joy. "Look at him!" they cackled, the pretty little effeminate crying. "What's the matter, baby boy? Can't stand a little blood?" I stood up. "Come, Helvy," I said. "Let's get out of here." She took my arm, her face scarlet, and we left the stands, followed by the hooted taunts of the women, more impressed by the sight of a man who wept at the spectacle of this obscene, bestial cruelty than they were by the skill and valor those poor devils displayed in dying. "For their amusement," I roared, after we got home. "Of course, if they so love gore, then let them cut their own throats, the rabid bitch vixens. Those were men, Helvy, God's creatures. They have souls and—" "Yes, dearest," my Helvetia said, and kissed me. "Lie back down now. Here, take this draught. It will cool your fever, and—" I said a very obscene Latin word. "Hades and Pluto take it, Helvy," I cried. "I've got a mother. What I took you for was a wife." She knelt beside my bed and held my hand. I'm not making fun of you, Nathan," she whispered. I hate these things, too. I hate our cruelty. I think it will one day destroy us. And I thank both Isis and your Jewish God that you're so fine, so high-strung, so tender. I couldn't love you if you weren't." But I'm sure she was a little ashamed of me. Just the same, she was, after all, a Roman. Who was it that destroyed us finally? A neighbor, surely, watching us going out whenever we could to the Ludi Cynicae, for both of us were enthralled by the pantomimes. He, greedy swine, came to the conclusion that we had something put by. When we returned from the theater one night, We hadn't any more. A window had been forced, a locked cupboard pried open, our little store was gone. I held Helvetia in my arms and listened to her cry. I didn't comfort her. I couldn't. Had I tried, my own tears would have choked my voice. Faster now. Flip over the portrait of our days together. Look upon my Helvy. See how she's changed. No longer a radiant creature of spring snow, dawn sunlight, blue heavenly eyes, is she? White, pale, drawn, her bones almost punching through her skin. That ugly, rattling sound, a cough, of course. Starvation is an ugly way to die. She was hidden behind the curtains when I came. I could see them shake with the silent, desolate fury of her weeping. I put my hand through the opening, dragged her forth, stood there, looked at her. She looked back. Her mouth came open. Her lips made a whitish blur. It'll grow back, Nathan. In no time at all. But my knees were gone from behind under me. I pressed my forehead to the floor. No man, I howled. No man at all. Ballless wonder. To let you do this. To force you to sell. Oh, Helvy, Helvy, of all of you I love most. My hair, she whispered. It's all right, Nathan. It'll grow back. And the wig makers gave me quite a lot. You see, I've bought meat. Sit down, my dearest, but I couldn't eat. Every time I looked at the close-cropped little pinkish globe, that was her head, delicate and fair like all of her, the bile and blood and grief rose in my throat and choked me. I found work, brought home 4 denarii before they saw me trying to lift with 2 hands a beam the other Fabri Lignari builders hurled upward to a companion with a flip of their wrist. I was out again. How many times? I don't remember. I couldn't join the collegia, those fraternal organizations of the workers which soften the worst abuses, because I didn't stay on any job long enough to make friends with those influential proles who might have presented me for membership. We dared not call upon Helvetia's strapping blonde sisters for help, though 3 of them lived in Rome with their husbands, because they'd be sure to tell her father, and marriage to a Jew was no longer taken as a matter of course. The imperator hated our holy race. Just 5 years before, he had conscripted 4,000 Roman Jewish youths and sent them out to sure death in Sardinia, expelling, at the same time, the rest of my people from Rome. Therefore, I could find no aid from that quarter either. Most of the Jews left in Rome were in hiding and were themselves starving. Helvetia took to her bed, too weak to move. I think that, in my heart of hearts, even then I knew why. She had almost ceased to eat at all, that I might have her share. I went mad. I prayed before her, before every shrine, in every temple, to every god in Rome, to Isis, because my Helvetia had a special devotion toward her. I returned again and again, and one morning it seemed to my feverish, starving gaze that her dead stone eyes lifted from the face of her dead stone child and smiled at me. Filled with mad hope, I did the only thing left for the hopeless. I went to the gladiatorial school and tried to sell my poor carcass to get the food and medicines to save my angel. The lanista, for so the trainers of gladiators were called in Rome, a Gaul with a hideously scarred and brutal face, walked around me as though I were an animal. turned to his second. "Ho, Brutus," he said. "He might make a retiarius, don't you think? These skinny little starvelings are often quick enough to—" I stood there sweating, hope in me like a fever. The retiari fought stark naked, armed only with a weighted net, a trident, and a dagger. Yet as often as not, the netmen won out against the gladiators and swordsmen. Under the crushing weight of their armor, the gladiators were slow, while the whirling, dancing, stinging insects that the retiari were, spinning their nets like gossamer wings above their agile heads, had the advantage of lightness, grace, speed. Of course, much of the time, a skilled gladiator simply disemboweled them with a single stroke, but once the net was cast, the gladiator tangled like an armored lizard in its folds. The retiarius had him helpless, and could slay or spare him, as the public willed it. Brutus looked at me, grunted. "I'll give him a try. Paulus, have the blunted weapons brought," he said. Ugly as he was, I could have kissed him. Desperation lent me the strength I no longer had. Grace and speed I was born with. 3 times I caught the Lanista Brutus in my net in that first trial. The brute stood back, untangled himself, said to the chief, "Lanista, the ugly gull, Polus. By the tits of the she-wolf, this skinny little bastard will do." I took the gladiator's oath, and I would suffer myself to be whipped with rods, burned with fire, killed with steel. But there was one thing I hadn't reckoned upon. Novice gladiators had to live at the school, and without me, Helvetia would surely die. I fell on my knees before Paulus, told him of my plight, begged him to let me at least spend my nights at home. He refused, profanely. "Hades, Nathianius," he rumbled. "How long you think you'll last if you enter the arena, with your legs lidden from bumping bellies, with your woman all night? A retiarius has to be fast. Speed's all he's got. And you, my boy, please me. Don't know when I've seen a beggar swift as you. But she's sick, Paulus." I all but wept. "She's very sick. She hasn't eaten in God knows when. And, suddenly inspiration struck me like a light. She's one of your own people. She's a Gaul, like you. Look here." I took the lock of pale sunlight hair I carried always in one of the telephone, along with a verse from the Song of Songs. A blasphemy, perhaps. But does not one reverence God by worshipping the loveliest creature he ever made? Paulus stared at that fair lock. A long time. A long, long time. Then he sighed. "Tell you what, kid. I'll send my old woman over to attend to her. Ursula's good at nursing, and she loves taking care o' youngsters anyhow. Likely because we never had any. Tell me, where'd you live?" He was as good as his word, and Ursula was a saint. A real one. Or did you think saints had to be Nazarenes? She lied to Helvetia about her great kindness. Fed her, bathed her, arranged her still short hair. Saved her life, telling her I was working as a secretary to a rich man who had taken so great a fancy to me that he had carried me aboard his private galley within the hour that we met, and borne me away to Sicily with him. Showed her the lying missive. I'd pen to confirm a tale so outrageously false that only a soul as simple, a heart as innocent as my Helvetia's, would have ever believed it. During the next 6 months, I lived at the school, trained endlessly, engaging in ferocious mock combats against the others, usually when I could manage it, for safety's sake, against my new friend, Andrai, ate well, slept without dreams, and at last, Paulus having deemed me ready, I was sent into the arena, where I killed men I didn't hate, some of them my own fellows, for the benefit of that obscenely howling mob, the Romans. I was afraid, of course, but I learned to live with that, too. To rise up in the morning, go to bed at night, live, breathe, have my being with crippling, murderous fear. Long before that full year, I served as a retiarius was out, I had gained a following. All the world knew by now that no swordsman had ever succeeded in so much as breaking my skin, drawing one drop of my blood from my naked hide. Women sent me love letters, tried to slip into my quarters in order to bed with me. I posed for sculptors, my beautifully muscled body oiled. I've spoken of Andrai. Like me, he was a Jew, the only other member of a race in the school. But beyond the accident of birth, we differed in everything. He was huge, fair as a Goth, wondrously beautiful. His name actually was Netzer, which is the word you Greeks translate as Andre, Netzer ben Hosea. Andrew, son of Hosea, you might say. I loved him. There is no other word. I hasten, lest you, being Greek, smile knowingly, to add that there was no conscious carnality in that love. He returned it with simple trust. We were brothers. Do I have to say it? Can you guess? He was tall and brawny, great thewed. So they made of him a gladiator. And one day, before great Caesar himself, we were forced to fight each other to the death. I won, as usual. I knelt before his struggling, net-entangled carcass, the dagger in my hand, raised streaming eyes to Caesar. "Kill him!" the mob roared, and Caesar turned his thumb down. I looked down at Andrai. He smiled at me. "You have my pardon, Nathan. Now strike quickly and hard," he said. I killed him, stood up, hurled that bloody blade away from me, bent and vomited upon the sand. The spectators were astonished. They began to hoot at me. Tiberius Caesar, Imperator, stood up. "What is the meaning of this, Retiarius?" "He was my friend, Caesar. I loved him," I said. Great Caesar stood there, frowning. Then he said it. "Free this man. Release him from his vows." And all that mob of murderous sycophants, who moments before had been howling for my blood, split deaf heaven with their approving roars. But now my fate had come full round again. The problem as before, how to keep my Helvetia alive. She still wasn't strong. If I couldn't procure food for her, she'd sink back again, grow paler, thinner, and then die. No, by Isis, no! I'd do murder first. Become a thief. A thief? Why not? I was slim and strong, my body superbly muscled, training to perfection. I could, I was sure, climb the highest wall, break open the strongest treasure chest, fight my way out of it. Do you know whose was the first patrician villa I broke into? Did you think I'd won free of the curious irony ruled and shaped my life as it did that of him who, though not my brother, was my twin, Yeshua HaNotzri? Why, Lydia's, of course. She was, as usual, waiting for a lover, and also, as usual, she was wide awake. At her first little scream, I put my dagger against her throat. She lay there, with the point pressing into her flesh, and smiled at me. "Take that thing away, beautiful boy," she cooed. "That isn't the blade I'd have you stab me with." I took the dagger away. "Money," I growled. "Jewels?" She laughed throatily. "You're a beginner, aren't you, darling?" she said. "Don't worry, I won't call my slaves, but you must be nice to me." "Nice to you how?" I got out. "Well, you might start by kissing me," Lydia said. I didn't bed with her that night. I didn't. To my tattered store of honor, be that one last ragged scrap laid, I was tempted to. God, how I was tempted to. Out of consideration for my poor angel's lingering weakness, I hadn't touched Helvetia since Caesar had unexpectedly freed me from gladiatorial slavery. I was young, fully recovered, strong. My blood howled and leaped through anguished veins. And Lydia, soaked in that perfume of hers that was almost pure musk, a gut-tangling animal scent, overlaid with a heady odor of spice, not flowers, with that languid, dark ivory body of hers, clean-shaven, breast-gilded, gold dust in her black hair, her fingers straying over my lean, hard-muscled body, was enough to set a prophet wild. Instead, at her bidding, I told her my story. She had the grace, the generosity, or the art, or more likely still, all three, to weep. I departed her house at dawn, after her Numidians had thrown her outraged would-be lover out when, belating and drunken, he finally did appear. And in my belt there was slung a purse, a very heavy purse. It had 10,000 sesterces in it, which Lydia had given me of her own free will. And she, of me, had only this, my promise to return on the morrow, that she might study how to aid me, how to help me escape from want, from hunger, now, henceforth, and forevermore. And I, fool that I was, kept that promise, went.